Well, you waited long enough for the most interactive presentation of the 2 days. So I don't pride myself on flying places to hear myself talk, so I expect this to be rather interactive. And to talk about the role of Acxiom in regard to the entire identity space. And one of the things that I always remind people of is in 1993, there were a grand total of 138 websites. 138 websites. Sounds like the Stone Ages, you know? Well, the same thing can be said for identity today. We're living in the Stone Ages. There's technology that you've heard yesterday and today that is already underfoot that's going to dramatically change the way we interact and the way we identify with each other online. And thanks to Mr. Burton for enlightening me earlier this year, there's a magic triangle that we're enabling here, and it is the selector, it's unique data, and it is a rules-based engine called Kynetx. And I'd like to walk you through that. And you know, the role that Acxiom plays in here is Acxiom is one of the largest context companies in the entire world. And Kynetx is enabling context automation. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. How do we go from low value, short-term, current environment to high value, long-term trust relationships? It's important to understand, you know, how we got here. So this is the traditional model. If you're in the data world, this is looking in the rear view mirror. This is the way the markets have behaved. There's been a huge wall between what's referred to generally as marketing data and reference data. So marketing data, everything that I know about you demographically, what your habits are, where you like to shop, loads and loads of data about that. Reference data, think of risk data, think of identity data, think of data that doesn't change. So your property, your cell phone, your social, and as we've studied these markets, this is the way the markets behave. So companies have purchased this way, they bought this way, they put their infrastructures this way, and that's the way a lot of big companies like Acxiom and people in our space have behaved. But as we've immersed ourselves in the last few years and we've studied this, one of the things that I've come across is there's a common denominator here. And the common denominator between these two is the linking of an individual record, which is a breakthrough because that starts to bring that wall down. And it starts to reveal a new market in the world, and it's called the identity market. And this is where I think we were, just as a corporation, probably as recent as May and June. So I can say reference, so here's Andy's address, this is where he lives, here are some of his hobbies, and this is what I can say about him. But that really doesn't do anything. It's at best single sign-on. So I can say, yes, he likes, you know, this retailer and perhaps you can come in, but that's not actionable. And that's when we came upon Phil and Steve in Kynetx and said, you know what, there's still something missing here. And what's missing in this picture is intent. And how do you capture intent with this data? So as I said, data, selector, and a rule. Marketing references the data, selector is the identity, and the intent is the rule. Now we've got a game, now we've got some magic going on here. As these identity markets have revealed themselves, it's very difficult. A lot of people say, Tim, what do you talk about the identity markets? Well, it's, you know, financial services or insurance. You can't say this is what the identity markets are doing. Well, this is how the identity markets are revealing themselves today. You heard Paul talk about Gov 2.0 yesterday, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology have those 4 levels of identification. So the first one, you just have to have a pulse and make sure you're not a big computer hitting my system, so not terribly useful. Second level, one-to-one. So I want to go into the IRS and I want to check my IRS account, or I want to go into the Social Security Administration, check my earnings for the last year. Level 3, one-to-many. So I'm a doctor and I want to check 10,000 patients' records. And level 4, is, as the DoD guys say, think of the war things, and don't worry about level 4. The education market. We've been approached by higher ed to say, can you help us reduce online cheating? So we partnered with a couple of big companies in the software space in higher ed to say, we'll put some identification randomly through a test. So if you're having your buddy take your test for you, and in the middle of it, bam, answer these questions. Increasing FTC enforcement. The FTC is clearly coming down with many, many rulings on behalf of consumers. And from Acxiom's point of view, why don't we embrace that as opposed to try to resist that, be champions of the consumer. Direct to the individuals, with the identity cards and open ID, can we start issuing credentials, as you heard so eloquently this morning and the last 2 days, so we reduce that level of fraud and stuff that's currently out there in the existing paradigms. Reducing costs to call centers and face-to-face transactions. That's one of the major reasons why that Gov 2.0 is happening. The whole idea behind that is, can I take hundreds of millions of transactions and push them online? So not only it's easier to work with, but we reduce dramatically hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions online. And finally, the Open ID Foundation and the Information Card Foundation. That's how we were, the first way we were introducing our traditional assets. Acxiom's a 40-year-old company that's lived in pretty much that first paradigm I showed you. But how do we reveal these assets to create new value in the world and to help protect people's identities and to advance the causes of the Open ID Foundation and the ICF? So let me summarize a 40-year-old company in 3 slides. For some of you are intimately aware of Acxiom, some of you just heard about it the first thing this morning. So this is how Acxiom's approaching the claims-based world as an identity authority with our capabilities. And what we'd really like to enable and embrace ourselves is to enable safe internet commerce, champion privacy, enable, facilitate interactions and commerces on the other side. It's interesting, every time we go to large corporations and say, how about greater levels of identity? Or the question right at the end of Kim's presentation of when is this going to be possible? A lot of people come and say, well, you're going to slow down my transactions, or you're going to slow down my commerce. The real answer to that is there's a lack of identity, so there's a lot of ability to commit fraud and make a lot of bad things happen. So when I say enable commerce, you're actually going to make more money by having these identity credentials out there in these new paradigms in the organization and across enterprise. There's two, when you think of Acxiom, think of 2 major capabilities that we bring to the market that very few organizations do, and that's why we're so encouraged with Kynetx and the entire OpenID and the ICF ability. And we're delighted that we can hopefully help move the cause forward in a dramatic way with our data assets. The very first one, this is a famous slide called the Katie Brown slide, and this has always been used for marketing purposes. So you have this Kevin Brown in the middle of the circle and a woman named Catherine Brown and all of her aliases around it. Well, for the longest time, Kevin Brown was down here and Katie was in the middle. And it was used to say, hey, you know what, we're going to market to Katie. And whether it's Kate Brown, Catherine Brown, Dr. K Brown, wherever she is, we're going to find her, and we're not going to mail or we're not going to market to Kevin. Well, you turn that on its head and say, put Kevin in the middle and say, Kevin's a really bad guy, and he's going to try to steal Katie Brown's identity. So one of the major things that we can do is we can find that needle in that haystack through this linking technology to say, you know what, just give me a name and address, and I'm going to find him. It's a very oversimplified way. It's very, very difficult to do, but we can do that. So that's the first lever Acxiom can do as far as linking individual records. The second major thing that we bring to the market is these claims-based data. So we have billions of records with hundreds of millions of people around the